Welcome back! Let's continue on our crash course on Chinese sauces. Now let's level up and learn the 5 advanced sauces and spices which are frequently used in Chinese cooking to add complexity and depth into the dishes and add characteristics to the regional cuisines. They are oyster sauce, fish sauce, Sichuan chili bean paste, Sichuan peppercorns, and starch. Let's check them out one by one. Oyster sauce. Oyster sauce are traditionally made by simmering oysters in water. However, in modern days, we have found time and cost-efficient ways to make the oyster sauce by adding oyster extracts and juice into a mix of salt, sugar, and starch. Oyster sauce gives an intense boost of umami to the dishes, and they are widely used in Cantonese cuisines. When you are picking your oyster sauce, make sure you choose the brands and bottles with real oyster extracts in the ingredient table. And also there's vegan versions of oyster sauce which are made from mushrooms. Fish sauce. They're made by fermenting small fish and shrimps, together with a lot of salt. The good quality fish sauce has a natural amber color, and they give a complex sea umami flavors into the dishes. They're also quite salty, so a lot of times they can be used as a replacement for salt. Fish sauce is also used a lot in Cantonese cooking. They can also be consumed directly as a dipping. Moving on to the Sichuan cuisine, Sichuan chili bean paste, or doubanjiang in Chinese. It is the soul of Sichuan cuisine. Sichuan chili bean paste is made from preserved broad beans, together with a lot of chilies and oil. They have a spicy and salty umami taste. We need to stir-fry them thoroughly before consuming the chili bean paste. They cannot be consumed directly because they will taste like smelly beans. For purchase, you should look for 郫县豆瓣, which is the most authentic version for the chili bean paste. 郫县 is a small county in Sichuan, and it is the most famous city for Sichuan chili bean paste. Sichuan peppercorns. They are a spice which has a tingling spiciness, both to our tongue and our nose. Sichuan peppercorn is the most distinguishing feature of Sichuan cuisine. They are super appetizing. They're not just a spice for food, but also an ingredient in Chinese medicine. The Sichuan peppercorns can be consumed raw as a dipping after we grind them to Sichuan pepper powder. Last but not least, the starch. There are many types of starch, such as cornstarch, tapioca starch, potato starch, etc. In Chinese cooking, the starch are normally used to condense soups and sauces so they reach a desired texture. It's a bit similar to the use of cream and butter in Western cooking. The starch are also used to marinate meat in Chinese cooking because they can form a protective layer for the meat and help the meat to stay tender during cooking. That's it! These are the sauces and spices that we will need to cook a lot of interesting Chinese recipes. Let's start cooking! Welcome back! Let's start our cooking with a simple wok noodle recipe with salt and pepper shrimp as the topping. Wok noodles are probably the most ordered dish in wok takeaway shops and Chinese restaurants. However, they're often coated with a thick layer of greasy sauce. This is not right. It's the easy way out to flavor the noodles without burning them, and it's also very unhealthy. The authentic wok noodles should actually be dry on the outside, with the flavors already infused into the noodles and the ingredients. And also, we'll be able to smell a nice slightly burned flavor, which in Chinese cooking, we refer it as guoqi or woke. In this lecture, we're going to learn the authentic way to wok the noodles. Use the salt and pepper shrimps as the protein topping. And also, I'll show you how to make your own salt and pepper spice, which you can store it and use it for many other dishes. But of course, you can also buy already made salt and pepper spice mix in the supermarkets. How to make your own salt and pepper spice? We need around 6 grams of Sichuan peppercorns, a small handful of fennel seeds, and white sesame. These two ingredients in total amounts to around 1 gram. And of course, we need some salt on the side. Take out a small saucepan and put it under low heat. Throw in the Sichuan peppercorns and roast it patiently under very low fire. We need to keep rotating the Sichuan peppercorns to prevent them from burning. When you see that the Sichuan peppercorns are turning a bit brown, it's time to also throw in the fennel seeds and white sesame to roast them together under low heat. After around 1 to 2 minutes of roasting, we will see that the fennel seeds and white sesame are turning a bit yellow and even have some golden spots. Put the spice mix into a grinder. You can use a stone grinder like I do, or you can also put them into an electric grinder and grind them into powder. After the spices are grinded, measure them in a small bowl. I got in total 8 grams of spice mix. That means that I will add 4 grams of salt into the spice mix. Mix them evenly and the salt and pepper mix is ready. You can store them in a jar and also use it for other dishes in the future, like salt and pepper inkfish, or even put it on top of your French fries. The bonus point of making your own salt and pepper spice is also that you can adjust the recipe to your own preference. For example, you can also add dried chilies or star anise into the spice mix. Just keep in mind that the ratio between salt and other spice mix should be in general 1 to 2. Welcome back! Let's start making the wok noodles. First of all, the ingredients. We need 130 grams of shrimps, 80 grams of egg noodles. You can also use other types of noodles. 130 grams of bean sprouts, half an onion, a quarter of a red bell pepper, 1 egg, 2 pieces of spring onion. You can of course replace the bean sprouts or bell pepper to other types of toppings that you like. Let's first marinate the shrimps. For big shrimps, make sure that you have divined them beforehand. Put the shrimps in a bowl. Add half teaspoon of salt, some white pepper, 1 teaspoon of rice wine. Crack an egg and put 1 egg white into the mix. 1 teaspoon of starch. Use your hand to mix it well and massage the sauce onto the shrimps. Marinate it for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, pour away the excess egg white and sauce mix. Add another teaspoon of starch. Mix it well and make sure that the starch is evenly coated around the shrimps. Meanwhile, waiting for the shrimps to be marinated, let's prepare the other side ingredients. Take a quarter of the red bell pepper. Cut it into thin stripes. Take half of the onion, peel the skin, and cut it into thin slices. Wash the spring onion. We only need the green part. Cut the spring onion greens into thin slices, which has around the equal length as the onions and the red bell pepper. We also need to rinse the bean sprouts. And now, all our side ingredients are ready. Let's cook the noodles. Bring a big pot of water into boil. Throw in the noodles and boil the noodles according to the package instruction. One of the most important success factors for wok noodles is that the noodles should not stick together. There is one simple trick in order to achieve this. Prepare a big bowl of cold water on the side. When the noodle is boiled, fish out the noodles into the bowl of cold water. Use your fork or chopsticks to rinse the noodles in the water so the starch that's attached to the noodle is washed away. Afterwards, fish out the noodles from the cold water and put them into a bowl. Sprinkle some sesame oil or just normal oil around the noodles and stir them so that the oil is evenly coated around the noodle. In this way, the noodles can sit aside, waiting to be woked without getting entangled. Now, let's finally start the wok process. Heat up a pan under high heat. Pour in around 1 tablespoon of oil when the pan is hot. Wait until the oil is also getting hot. Pour in the shrimps. Let the shrimps fry quietly on the pan and only flip side when the color has changed. When the shrimp has turned red on both sides, we can now spread some salt and pepper spice that we made earlier onto the shrimp. Stir and mix evenly, and the salt and pepper shrimp topping is ready. Fish them out and we will use it later. Keep on high heat and add around another tablespoon of oil. When the oil is also heating up a bit, throw in the onions. Fry them until they are getting a bit soft. We can now add in the red bell pepper. Again, stir fry evenly under high heat till it's softening up a bit. Throw in the bean sprouts and stir them together. The bean sprouts take very little time to be ready, so we only add them in at the last. When all three veggies are turning a bit transparent, we can now put in the noodles and start the flavoring. We need around 1 tablespoon of oyster sauce, 1 tablespoon of light soy sauce. Mix the sauce with the noodles and side ingredients evenly. Stir fry them. After the noodles are evenly coated with a light brown color, grind a lot of black pepper. And also add double amount of white pepper. Quickly stir fry them. White pepper can compensate a lot of the spiciness of black pepper. They are a great couple together. Finally, throw in the spring onion greens and the shrimps. Quickly stir fry them with the rest for around 30 seconds maximum, and some final salt to taste. Pour the noodle onto a plate, and our wok noodle with salt and pepper shrimps is ready. You can see that the noodles are nicely dry and separated from each other, and the black pepper spice are attached to the noodles. The shrimps are crispy on the outside with the coated layer, but tender on the inside. On top, there is also a nice wok smell coming from the plate. Enjoy it while it's still hot. Welcome back! In this lecture, we're going to cook the recipe of mapo tofu. It is the signature dish of Sichuan cuisine. In the most original mapo tofu recipe, some grounded beef are normally used. But today, we're going to cook the vegetarian version, as this dish is mainly featuring the taste of Sichuan chili bean paste, as well as a tingling flavor from the Sichuan peppercorns. Let's get started. First of all, the ingredients. We need 1 big block of silk tofu. You can also use the soft tofu here, but I wouldn't recommend you to replace it with the firm tofu. It lacks the tender texture, which is important for mapo tofu recipe. 3 garlic cloves, 1 piece of spring onion, a small handful of Sichuan peppercorns, a few grams of chili powder, depending on your spicy tolerance level, and 40 grams of Sichuan chili bean paste. This is the cornerstone taste of mapo tofu. Let's start the preparation work by pre-processing the tofu. First, cut the tofu into blocks of around 2 centimeters. Bring a pot of water into boil, and then gently put in the silk tofu. Add around ½ teaspoon of salt, a few drops of dark soy sauce, and boil it for 2 minutes. As we know that tofu contains a lot of water, and we do not want the water to come out so much while it's cooked in the sauce. And also, tofu carries a beany taste, which a lot of people find unpleasant. So by adding the salt in the pre-processing step is on one hand to force the tofu to already give out some of its juice, and on the other hand to give the tofu already some base flavor. On top of that, the dark soy sauce is to already infuse some base color into the tofu. After 2 minutes, fish out the tofu and set it aside for use later. Meanwhile waiting for the tofu, let's prepare the other side ingredients. The spring onion. We want to cut the spring onion into small rings. The garlic cloves. Smash them and then remove the skin. Wash the garlic and then mince the garlic into fine tiny little pieces. Let's also prepare some starch water on the side. Take a small bowl, add 1 tablespoon of cornstarch, and add around 5 tablespoons of water. Mix it well. You can also use potato starch, tapioca starch, any starch that you have. The starch water is used later to condense the sauce and let it coat around the tofu. This is actually quite similar to the use of cream and butter in Western cooking. That's all we need to prepare for mapo tofu. And let's move on to the stove. Turn on high heat. When you feel the pan is really hot, add around 1 tablespoon of oil. Turn around the pan and let the oil evenly covering the bottom. Add in the Sichuan peppercorns and slowly stir-fry them under low to medium heat. This is to infuse the smell and taste of Sichuan peppercorns into the oil. And we need to be really patient here by frying them into cold oil and under low to medium heat. If we fry the Sichuan peppercorns into really high heat, and they will burn very easily, and the taste of burnt Sichuan peppercorns is quite bad. When you see the Sichuan peppercorns are kinda opening up and generate a lot of smell, that means it's ready and it's time to add in the Sichuan chili bean paste. Again, fry the chili bean paste under low to medium heat. We want to fry them really thoroughly until the red oil is coming out. Then we can add in the minced garlic. Stir-fry the garlic with the chili bean paste until the garlic flavor is coming out. Now add in the chili powder mixed with the rest. But if you cannot handle too much spicy, you can also skip this part. When the paste is thoroughly mixed, we can now add in some boiled water. The water should be able to cover about half of the depth of the tofu. Mix it and let's do some further flavoring. Add 1 teaspoon of light soy sauce, half a teaspoon of sugar, some white pepper. Mix the sauce evenly. Add in the tofu. As you can see that after some time of sitting aside, the tofu has already given out more water. Make sure you filter out all the water before putting the tofu into the sauce. Lay the tofu evenly in the sauce and let it boil under medium heat for around 4 minutes. After 4 minutes, you will see the sauce has already reduced a bit. However, it's still too much for mapo tofu, and now we need to use the starch water to condense the sauce. For mapo tofu, we need to use the starch water in 3 times. First time, add 1 tablespoon of starch water and gently stir it around the sauce. This is to condense some of the water. When you see the sauce starts to bubbling a bit and getting denser, we can add the 2nd tablespoon of starch water. Again, very gently stir the starch water around the sauce. And then we will repeat the process for the 3rd time. The reason that we need to do it in 3 times is because that the tofu is continuously giving out water, and we want to use the starch water gradually to absorb the water that the tofu gives out. And after the 3rd time, you will see the sauce is nicely coated around the tofu. Now sprinkle in the spring onion rings. Stir them evenly, and the mapo tofu is ready. We can see that the mapo sauce has already formed a layer of coating around the tofu. When we move the pan, the sauce will move along with the tofu. Gently pour the tofu on a plate. If you have it, you can also spread some Sichuan pepper powder on top to stimulate more tingling taste. And our mapo tofu is ready. The mapo sauce has firmly coated the tofu, and the flavor is already infused into it thanks to the braising method. Enjoy it! Welcome back! In this lecture, we're going to learn the recipe of Kung Pao chicken. It is another signature dish of Sichuan cuisine. It features a mild spiciness with hints of sweet. And also there is the taste of Sichuan peppercorns on the background. The Kung Pao chicken also has a blend of texture from the tenderness of the chicken and the crispiness from the peanuts. It forms a nice contrast. After this lecture, we'll also be able to make the classic Kung Pao sauce and apply it to various different ingredients. Let's get started. Let's check the ingredients first. We need 200 grams of deboned chicken leg, and it's better to be without skin, the white part of a leek. 30 grams of roasted peanuts, ideally without the skin, 2 garlic cloves, around 2 centimeters of ginger, a small handful of Sichuan peppercorns, a few dried chilies, and if you want it, we can also add in some cucumber. Even though in the most original Kung Pao chicken recipe, there are no other vegetables like cucumber or carrots. Let's start with marinating the chicken. This is the key to help the chicken stay tender, which is essential for the Kung Pao chicken recipe. We need to first prepare some leek and ginger water. Cut off the leek white. Cut a few thin slices of leek rings. You can also replace the leek white with spring onion white. Take around a third of the ginger and cut them into thin slices. Put the leek white and the ginger into a small bowl and add enough water to cover them. Set the water aside for around 5 to 10 minutes. This is waiting for the juice from the leek and ginger to infuse into the water. The leek and ginger water are frequently used in Chinese cooking when marinating meat. They will, on one hand, help to remove the unpleasant bloody smell from the meat, while replenish some of the water and juice into the meat, so they can stay tender. To accelerate the infusion process, we can use our hand to squeeze the leek and ginger. Now let's cut the chicken leg. First, we want to cut and slice the thick part of the chicken leg to make sure that the whole chicken leg is of equal thickness everywhere. Then we can cut the chicken leg into blocks around the same size as the first section of our thumb. After cutting the chicken, place them into a small bowl. Add a quarter teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of light soy sauce, 2 teaspoons of rice wine, some white pepper, half teaspoon of dark soy sauce. And then use our hand to evenly massage the marinade with the chicken. When the marinade is evenly coated around the chicken, we can now add the leek and ginger water. Add around half to 1 tablespoon of the water, and then use the hand to quickly massage the water into the chicken. When we see that there is no excess water and it is fully massaged into the chicken, we can add another half tablespoon of leek and ginger water. Repeat the same massaging process and make sure that there are no excess water around the chicken. Now we can add 1.5 teaspoons of cornstarch. Mix it well with the chicken so it is evenly coated around the blocks. Set it aside and wait for it to marinate for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, we can add around another tablespoon of sesame oil or normal oil and mix it with the chicken. By adding the oil at last, it is forming another protective layer so the chicken blocks will not easily stick with each other and with the pan while being fried. Now our chicken is prepared. We can use the same marinating formula and method to other meats as beef and pork when we want to keep the meat really tender. While waiting for the chicken to be marinated, let's learn how to make the classic Kung Pao sauce. First, we need to prepare some spices. Take around 4 centimeters from the remainder of the leek whites. Cut them vertically into 4 quarters, and then cut them into pieces of around 1 centimeter. Remove the skin of the remainder ginger. Wash them and again cut them into thin slices. The garlic. Remove the skin of the garlic. Rinse it and also cut them into thin slices. Place the slices of the leek, ginger and garlic into a small bowl. And let's start the flavoring. Add 1 tablespoon of light soy sauce, 1 tablespoon of rice wine, half a teaspoon of dark soy sauce, around 0.6 tablespoon of dark vinegar, and 0.6 tablespoon of sugar. The ratio between the vinegar and sugar is 1:1. Some white pepper, a quarter teaspoon of salt, and we also need to add a bit of starch water, which consists of 1 teaspoon of starch and 2 teaspoons of water. Mix the sauce and spices evenly, and we have our Kung Pao sauce ready. We can apply the Kung Pao sauce not only to the chicken, but also to other ingredients like shrimp, beef, or pork. For the cucumber, we need only 4 to 5 centimeters of it. Cut the cucumber into blocks of around 1 centimeter. Although cucumber is not in the most original Kung Pao chicken recipe, a lot of new recipe has already adapted and include vegetables like cucumber and carrots, and they indeed add a nice contrast of texture into the dish. Last but not least, the peanuts. Ideally that we have the roasted and peeled peanuts, but if your peanuts are not peeled, you can do the dirty work like me. Scrub off the skins of the peanuts, either blow the skins away, which may leave a mess in the kitchen, or hand-pick the peanuts into another plate. Now we have all ingredients ready, and let's fire up. Turn on high heat and wait until the pan is really hot and even have some smoke coming out. Then adding around 2 tablespoons of oil. Turn around the pan so the oil is also coating around the side of the pan. Add in the chicken when the oil is only slightly heated, so basically after a few seconds after the oil is in the pan. Do not stir the chicken yet. Let it fry and form a protective layer on the bottom of the pan. We can gently shake the pan and let the oil to more evenly touch every side of the chicken. After the bottom has already formed a thin layer of crust, we can start to stir and fry each side of the chicken. At this step, we should always keep the stove at the high heat. This so-called hot pan cold oil method helps to prevent the meat from sticking to the pan. This is a very nice trick, especially when you are cooking with a steel pan rather than a non-stick pan. When the chicken has changed color on all sides and turning a bit golden on the outside, throw in the cucumbers. Stir fry them quickly together with the chicken and in the oil for maximally 30 seconds. When the cucumbers are also coated evenly with oil, fish the chicken and cucumbers out into a plate. Since we've already used a lot of oil to fry the chicken and cucumbers, we can reutilize the oil and the chicken fat by filtering them back to the pan. This will reduce some oil intake. But if you don't want the hassle, you can also just add around half tablespoon of fresh oil. Throw in the Sichuan peppercorns. Slowly stir-fry the Sichuan peppercorns under low to medium heat until they are gradually opening up and generating a lot of smell. If you don't want to randomly and unexpectedly bite into a Sichuan peppercorn while chewing your chicken, you can now fish the Sichuan peppercorns out, leaving the infused oil behind in the pan. But if you don't mind suddenly bite into them, you can also just leave the Sichuan peppercorns in the pan. Throw in the dried chilies and stir-fry them under medium heat. Again, when the smell comes out, we can pour back all the chicken and cucumber into the pan. And now pour the Kung Pao sauce along the side of the pan. Turn back to high heat. Quickly stir and mix the chicken with the Kung Pao sauce. This cooking step should be really fast, of around just 30 seconds. When the Kung Pao sauce is tightly wrapped around the cucumber and chicken, throw the peanuts into the pan and quickly stir-fry them for a few seconds. Pour them on a plate. And our dish is ready. Kung Pao sauce has evenly wrapped around all the ingredients. The chicken is very bouncy, forming a nice contrast against the crunchy cucumber and crispy peanuts. Enjoy it! Welcome back! In this lecture, we're going to learn how to make Chatsu, or the Hong Kong barbecue pork, at home. Obviously, the Chatsu sauce is the key to make a successful Chatsu dish. And every restaurant has their own secret recipe. However, they mostly come with food coloring in order to make the color so red. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make our own Chatsu sauce from scratch without any food coloring. And you will also be able to adjust the taste to your own preference. However, if you don't want the hassle, you can also buy the bottled Chatsu sauce from the supermarkets. And you can jump directly to the next video, which I will show you both ways to make Chatsu with both the homemade sauce and the bottled sauce. Let's get started. First, we will need a few spices in order to make the sauce. 3 spring onion whites, half an onion, a big chunk of ginger, and 4 to 5 garlic cloves. Let's deal with the spices first. Take only the white part of the spring onion. Remove the roots, wash them, and cut them into big pieces. The onion. Remove the skin of the onion. You can also use shallots here. Wash it and then also cut it into big chunks. The ginger. Cut the ginger into thin pieces. The garlic. Smash the garlic. Remove the skin and put it aside. Set up a small saucepan on low heat. Add around 2 tablespoons of oil. Heat up the oil a little bit under low heat, and then add in all the spices that we just cut. We're going to use these spices to infuse a small pot of oil, and then use the oil as the base for the chassu sauce. The spice-infused oil is frequently used in Chinese cooking in order to add complex aroma and taste into the dishes. Let the spices slowly cook in the oil, and we should stir them occasionally to avoid them from burning. When we see that the spices start to get a bit brown and goldenish, and the oil bubbles a bit, that means the oil is ready. This process may take quite long. In my case, it took around 7 minutes. Filter out the oil from the spices and pour the oil back into the pot. While waiting for the oil to be ready, we can start combining the sauce. Add 2 tablespoons of light soy sauce, 2 tablespoons of rice wine, 2 tablespoons of oyster sauce, 1.5 teaspoons of dark soy sauce, 1.5 teaspoons of fish sauce, some white pepper, and I added around 10 grams of brown sugar. I'm using brown sugar here to add some natural red color into the sauce. If you don't have brown color, you can also just use normal sugar. We also need to prepare some starch water on the side in order to condense the sauce later. The starch water consists of 1 tablespoon of starch and 6 tablespoons of water. Mix the sauce well. Let's move back to the stove. Pour back the infused oil into the saucepan. Turn on low heat, pour in the sauce, and mix it thoroughly with the oil. Use the low heat to gradually boil the sauce, and wait for the sugar to completely melt in the sauce. Add 2 teaspoons of white sugar to increase the sweetness of the sauce. You can also add the sugar earlier at the sauce stage. Stir it well and wait for the sauce to condense a bit under the low heat. In my case, I have boiled the sauce for around 3 minutes, when it starts to crystallize a little bit and having bubbles. And now we can condense the sauce to make the texture a bit more sticky, which it can stay on the meats better. Add in 1 tablespoon of the starch water. Mix it. Wait until the starch water fully absorbs the water, and we will see the sauce has already becoming a lot denser. Add another tablespoon of starch water to further condense the sauce. When the texture of the sauce has become a lot more stickier, but not as thick as a jelly, we can call the sauce ready. Pour the sauce in a small bowl. Depending on the amount of the meat that you're going to make the chassu, we might not need the full amount of the chassu sauce. We can store the excess sauce in a closed jar and store them in the fridge for future use. We can also use the chassu sauce to other types of meat, like beef or chicken. Now our homemade chassu sauce is ready. Let's move on to the next video to learn how to make the chassu. hours. 24 hours or 48 hours are also a good time, so the flavor will go deeper. I'm making a small letter remark on the 2 zip bags. Y is for my own homemade sauce, and L is for the leaking. The chassu will have a lot more crispy parts. Now, after the grilling, our chassu is ready. Feel the sizzling sound from the pork and the nice chassu smell that fills the kitchen. From the outside, the 2 chassu doesn't look much different. Let's cut the chassu into slices. The inside of chassu has a nice pinkish color and is still very juicy. The chassu is nicely to be enjoyed with a bowl of rice. Enjoy it! Welcome back! In this lecture, we're going to learn the recipe, sweet and sour pork. Sweet and sour pork is definitely among the all-time top 5 dishes ordered in Chinese restaurants abroad. It is indeed a very Chinese dish that exists in Cantonese cuisine and multiple other cuisines in China. We love it for the crispy texture and the sweet and sour sauce coated around the pork. To make the dish at home, we need to learn how to mix the batter so it tightly coats around the pork, and how to fry the pork so that it remains crispy after further cooking with the sauce. And also in this lecture, I'll show you 2 ways of making the sweet and sour sauce. A traditional Chinese version, which doesn't involve any ketchup, and a newly adapted version in China, which starts to use ketchup. There is a lot of cooking ahead. Let's get started. First of all, the ingredients. We need 200 grams of pork tenderloin, around 4 centimeters of leek white, around 3 centimeters of ginger, 2 garlic cloves, 80 grams of flour, and 80 grams of starch. And don't forget ketchup for the sauce. Let's start with the pork. Cut the pork tenderloin into pieces of around 1 centimeter thick. Then take each piece, smash them with the side of the knife in order to break the fibers. Then cut thin stripe patterns on the pork. Be careful, don't cut through the pork, but only leaving thin patterns on it. This is also trying to break the fibers in the pork and let it loosen up a bit, so the tenderloin will become even tender. Repeat the process for both sides of the pork. After the smashing and patterning, the pork pieces has become much flatter and with a lot of pattern stripes on top. Now we can cut the pork tenderloin into long stripes of around 1 centimeter wide. Put the pork vinegar here, a quarter teaspoon of salt, add a quarter teaspoon of starch, 1 tablespoon of water. Mix the sauce well. And we have the adapted sauce ready. Let's move on to make the batter. Take a big bowl. Add 80 grams of flour. You can use high gluten or medium gluten flour. And 60 grams of starch. Add around 140 grams of water. Slowly mix the water and the flour together. The texture of the batter should be sticky but still running. You can slightly adjust the amount of the water to reach the desired texture. There are also people using the egg and starch-based batter, but it's not ideal for the sweet and sour recipe because the fried pork wouldn't be crispy enough to withstand further cooking with the sauce. I've also made a small video in the next lecture to compare the results of both batters. Pour in the marinated pork tenderloin, mix it well so the pork is thoroughly covered with the batter. You can see the batter texture makes it able to coat firmly around the pork without falling. Now we have everything prepared. Welcome back to the recipe of sweet and sour pork. Let's finally start frying the pork. Heat up a pot of oil until 160 degrees. Don't worry if you don't have a food thermometer. We can use our eyes and some equipment to estimate the oil temperature. When there are a lot of oil stripes forming, and we can put in a chopsticks or a wooden stick. If we see a bit of small bubbles forming around the chopsticks, it means the temperature is about ready. Carefully put in the pork tenderloin, stripe by stripe, otherwise they will stick together. Depending on the size of your oil pot, you can determine how many pork stripes you can fry in one batch, so that they wouldn't stick together. Turn to low heat during the frying in order to just keep the temperature as is. In most of the Chinese frying technique, the ingredients need to fry twice in order to stay crispy. The first fry takes around 90 seconds. When we see that the batter has fully formed shape and becoming crispy, we can fish the stripes out and continue for the next batch. The first time frying is using a lower temperature and longer time in order to form the shape for the pork and make sure that the pork tenderloin is cooked inside. And now we can move on to the second frying process. We need to heat up the pork to 190 degrees. That means when we put in the chopsticks, there will be a lot of oil bubbles popping fiercely around the chopsticks. Now we can add in the fried pork tenderloin and fry them for around 30 seconds. Remember to turn back to low heat during frying in order to keep the temperature as is. When we see that the color has changed and have some golden and brown spots, we can fish them out. The second frying process is to quickly expel all the excess water came out from the pork and make the batter extra crispy and add some coloring to the crispy pork. Now we have our pork tenderloin fried. Actually, it's already very tasty to eat the pork now. Listen to the sound of the batter. It's very crispy, and the batter is also not very thick. It's lightly coated around the pork. Now, let's finalize with the sweet and sour sauce. First, the traditional version. Set up a pan on medium heat. Add around half to 1 tablespoon of oil. Heat up the oil. Pour in the traditional sauce. Stir around the sauce in the pan, and we will see that the sauce will gradually condense and becoming sticky thanks to the starch water inside. When the sauce has condensed a bit and having quite some bubbles, we can add in the pork tenderloin. Quickly stir around and wrap the sauce evenly around the pork, and the traditional version of sweet and sour pork is ready. Let's move on to the adapted sauce. It's about the same process. Also heat up some oil, add in the sauce. Heat up the sauce under low heat until the sauce to fully mix together and condense. When the sauce texture has becoming a bit stickier and having bubbles, add in the fried pork tenderloin. Quickly mix and wrap the sauce around the pork tenderloin, and the adapted version of sweet and sour pork is ready. The sauce is nicely coated around the pork, but it doesn't stop the pork from being crispy. Listen to the sound of cracking into the pork. I wonder which sauce do you prefer? Let me know in the Q&A section. Enjoy it while it's still hot and crispy. Welcome back! Let's continue on the recipe of sweet and sour pork. In this video, I'm going to do a small comparison between the two batters used to fry the pork. One is the batter that we used in the course recipe, as shown in the previous video, which is a mix of flour and starch. And another kind of batter, which actually a lot of people use, is an egg and starch-based batter. To make this batter, crack a full egg into the marinated meat. Mix the egg thoroughly with the meat. And then prepare another bowl of starch. Dip the egg-coated pork tenderloin into the starch and let the starch coat around the pork. And this is the egg and starch-based batter. Let's compare the frying results of both batters. During the first fry, as we have seen in the first lecture, this is the result of the flour and starch-based batter. The batter has fully formed shape around the pork tenderloin. We cannot see any pork texture. Let's try the egg batter. We can see after the frying, we're basically seeing the shape and texture of the pork tenderloin. The batter is only lightly coated around the pork. This doesn't really prevent the juice from the pork from going out. After the second frying, flour-based batter is becoming even crispier and had some golden color. And for the egg batter, the pork strips did expanded a bit and becoming more crispier. However, we can still see a lot of patterns from the pork. That means the batter hasn't really formed a full layer around the pork to protect the pork. The flour-based batter makes far more crispy fried pork than the egg-based one, because they're able to form a nice thin layer around the pork. Especially for a dish like sweet and sour pork, where we still need to further cook the fried pork in thick sauces, it's better to use the flour-based batter in dishes like this. Enjoy it while it's still hot and crispy. Welcome back! We have come to the final recipe of this course, wonton soup. A successful bowl of wonton soup needs flavorful and juicy wontons and a bowl of heartwarming soup. Making wonton soup does require a lot of work. There are many types of wontons in China, with different fillings, different flavor of soup, or even without any soup. In this video, I'm going to show you the Cantonese version, with pork and shrimps as the filling, and only using ingredients that's likely accessible outside of China. Let's get started! First of all, the ingredients. We need 200 grams of shrimps, 200 grams of minced pork. The pork is better to contain a little bit of fat. The best ratio between fat and muscles is around 1:3. Around 200 grams of wonton wraps, which you can buy them in almost all the Asian supermarkets abroad. Around 3 centimeters of ginger, 2 eggs, 1 spring onion. Let's start with prepare the shrimp fillings. Make sure that your shrimps has already been deveined. If you have these big shrimps, we can cut one shrimp into 2 to 3 parts, so they all have similar sizes of around 2 to 3 centimeters. And we need to marinate the shrimps a little bit. Add a quarter teaspoon of salt, some white pepper, a teaspoon of rice wine, and a teaspoon of starch. Mix them well with the shrimps and set it aside for later use. Moving on to the meat fillings. Take the spring onion, remove the root, wash it, and cut the spring onion into a few smaller parts and cut them into rings, and then finely chop them. We need to be really patient here to chop them into really fine pieces, because you wouldn't want to bite into a firm spring onion in the wonton. You can of course also use a small grinder here to save some work. And the ginger. Remove the skin of the ginger and again cut it into slices, pieces, and then into really fine tiny little pieces. We want the ginger to be really small. After the ginger is minced, we can put the minced ginger and spring onion into a bowl where the minced pork is. Let's marinate the meat. Crack an egg into the bowl. The egg is gonna help the meat fillings to bind together. Add 1 tablespoon of light soy sauce, 1 tablespoon of rice wine, half teaspoon of salt, half teaspoon of sugar, some white pepper, 1 teaspoon of sesame oil. Then use chopsticks or fork to start mixing the sauce's spices with the meat together. Circle the chopsticks in the meat fillings only in one direction, clockwise or counterclockwise. Do not do any zigzag or changing direction. The reason for this is to help the fibers and the protein in the meat to start bind with each other. Gradually, you will find the meat fillings start to getting stickier and stickier, and you will feel more frictions when you are circling in the meat fillings. The entanglement starts to form. The meat fillings made in this way will taste juicier because they lock the meat juice inside, and also they will act as a natural binder for the wonton because they are sticky themselves, so the wonton wouldn't open while being cooked. When you see that the meat is becoming quite sticky in a texture like this, that means it's ready. Set it aside and we'll start making the wontons. Prepare a big clean surface. You can use a big cutting board. Spread some flour evenly over the plank. This is to prevent the wontons from sticking to the board. And also we need to prepare a small cup of water on the side. Take 1 piece of wonton wrap, hold it on your palm. Put 1 piece of shrimp in the middle of the wonton wrap and add some meat fillings on top. Depending on the size of your wonton wrap, you can adjust how much filling do you put. And then use your finger to dip some water and wet the 4 sides of the wonton wrap. Take one corner, fold it diagonally next to the opposite corner. Then take the other side, move it towards the folding point, and do the same for the other side. And then use your thumb and other fingers to squeeze the folds together, and the wonton is ready. This is the most common way to fold the Cantonese wontons, and they look a bit like a phoenix tail, so we call it the phoenix wontons. In the next video, I'll also show you a few other ways to wrap the wontons. Let's watch the process again. The water acts as a binder for the wonton wrap, and so does the meat fillings, so you can also squeeze the wonton wrap just outside of the meat fillings, so the meat will act as a natural binder. For beginner wonton wrappers, we shouldn't be too greedy. We'd rather put too little wonton fillings in a wonton rather than too much, because you will find it harder to fold and close the wontons, and the wontons are easier to break. Just like this wrong example here, I've put way too much fillings in this wrap and it broke immediately. Now we've folded the whole batch of wonton. If we can't consume them in one go, we can store them in the freezer. Make sure that you first put the wontons separately on a plank to avoid them from sticking with each other. Put them in a freezer for 1 to 2 hours, so the outside of the wonton has frozen a bit. Then we can put them together into a freezer bag. Now, let's make the soup base. We only need a few ingredients and sauces to make the soup taste so flavorful yet so natural. Ingredient number 1, an egg roll. Crack an egg. Whisk it till small bubbles forming on the top. Add a little bit of salt and whisk it again. Heat up a small flat pan. Spray some oil. Pour in some of the egg. Turn around the pan so that the egg can thinly and evenly cover the bottom of the pan. When the egg has formed shape, then we can gently and slowly flip side. When both sides of the egg has been cooked, we can move it onto the cutting board. Fold it 2 times so they are a loose egg roll, and cut them into thin stripes. Set it aside for later use. Take out a big bowl for the soup. Add 1 tablespoon of light soy sauce. Quite some white pepper. The white pepper increases a lot of the flavor. A 1/4 teaspoon of salt. A 1/4 teaspoon of sugar. A teaspoon of sesame oil. If you have it, add a small handful of dried shrimps and also a little bit of dried seaweed. Both the dried shrimps and dried seaweed will instantly infuse a lot of sea flavor into the soup and make the soup super tasty from natural ingredients. Add some of the egg rolls that we just made. Boil around 400 to 500 milliliters of water. Pour the water in and dilute the soup. And we have our soup base ready. For the diehards, you can replace the water with some clear chicken soup. Then you will have an even tastier wonton soup. We've come to the final step, boiling the wontons. Bring a big pot of water in to boil and gently throw in the wontons one by one. Stir a bit to prevent the wontons from sticking to the bottom. Boil it under high heat for around 2 minutes. When we see that the wontons are floating on the water and the skin is becoming transparent, that means the wonton is ready. Fish the wontons out, put them into the soup, and our wonton soup is ready. Sprinkle in some spring onion greens, and we can start sipping the wonton soup. You can see the pinkish color of the shrimps and the pork fillings through the thin wonton wrap. When we bite into it, we'll taste the mixed texture and flavors from both the pork fillings and the shrimp, and take a sip of this light yet flavorful wonton soup in between. Enjoy it! Welcome back to the recipe of wonton soup. In this video, I'm going to show you more ways to fold your wontons. In the last video, we have already learned the phoenix version, which is generally used in the Cantonese wontons. Now let's check out the version number 2, which we call it a gold ingot. Place a wonton wrap on the palm, add the fillings in the middle of the wrap. Dip some water to wet all sides of the wonton wrap. Fold the wonton to a rectangular shape. Squeeze the sides so they are attached together, and also squeeze near the wonton fillings so the meat fillings can help to bind the wonton wrap as well. Then, hold the lower 2 corners of the rectangular and fold them in the middle. Bind it with some dipping of water, and then flip side. You will see a little gold ingot. Version number 3. The hat. This folding technique is actually very similar to the gold ingot one. Take a wonton wrap. Again, place the fillings in the middle of the wrap. Dip some water to wet all sides of the wonton. And then take a corner of the wonton wrap and fold it diagonally, so the wonton will become a triangle shape. Squeeze and bind the sides of the wonton and also around the meat fillings. Then take the lower 2 corners. Fold them to the center. Dip some water to bind the 2 corners, and then flip side. We have a little hat ready. Last but not least, the envelope. Take a wonton wrap on the palm and place some fillings on the lower third part of the wrap instead of in the middle. We need to put less fillings than the earlier versions. And then wet the bottom corner, fold it next to the wonton fillings. Make sure the corner has stick on the wrap, and then fold it again. Take the 2 corners on both sides and fold them. Dip some water to bind the 2 corners. And we have a small envelope ready. These are the 4 commonly used methods to fold wontons. Try it out and see which method do you like it the most. Enjoy folding your wontons!